Everybody, welcome to our live show. Thanks for joining us again. We had such a great time doing this 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Koberger case. We're like, let's do it again. Let's do it again. We had such great feedback from you guys. And I will tell you, I am really looking forward to talking about this topic with all of you because it's one we have been covering for quite some time. I want your opinions on it. Ruby Franke. See, that's one of those cases that is coming to its legal conclusion, but there is just so much to break down. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you're like, what's the Ruby Franke case? First, I'll tell you, shame on you. You haven't been watching or listening to Sidebar because we have been covering this since August, okay? We have been actively following every aspect of this case since the news broke in August of 2023 out in Utah. Now, this is when two young children of once popular YouTuber Ruby Franke, they were found malnourished, they were found abused, they were found injured. They were at the home of her business partner, Jodi Hildebrandt. Come to learn that these kids were denied food and water. They were forced to work outside in the summer heat. Ruby had actually kicked her 12-year-old son, Russell, while she was wearing boots, held his head underwater. He had been tied up, suffered extreme wounds because of the way that he was bound. Now, Jodi Hildebrandt, we came to learn, forced Ruby's 9-year-old daughter, Eve, to jump into a cactus multiple times. This is what we're talking about here. And this was apparently all done for the kids' own good. Yeah, they were made to believe that they were being punished, that they had to get the evil out of them, which is not that surprising because people had been following Ruby Franke for years. Let's be clear about that. She had started this YouTube channel that was so popular. It was called 8 Passengers. She started with her husband, Kevin, back in 2015, had over 2 million subscribers at one point. They documented the lives of their family and their 6 children, but it came under fire because people online got really upset. They thought the way that she was parenting her kids was extreme. There was an example of her taking her son Chad's bed away for months. There was another video that came out where she told her 6-year-old daughter, or she was talking about her 6-year-old daughter, she forgot to make lunch for herself going to school that day. And she said, guess what? If she doesn't make herself lunch, she goes hungry, forcing her son to do push-ups as a form of punishment. And so people online really were disturbed by what they were seeing. And they filed 2 change.org petitions that were set up online. The Department of Child and Family Services was called at one point. Police were called to the home at one point. This happened after there were reports that the kids were left home alone. But nothing really came of it. We do know that Ruby had actually stopped posting to the 8 Passengers channel in 2022. She then linked up with Jodi Hildebrandt, her co-defendant, her business partner. Jodi Hildebrandt was this licensed mental health counselor. She had been running an organization known as Connections. It's like a life coaching organization. And Jodi herself was very controversial, right? People came out. They said that her teachings ruined their lives, ruined their marriages. In fact, her niece, Jesse Hildebrand, spoke with us on Sidebar and Law&Crime, detailing to us the abuse that they suffered at the hands of Jodi when they lived with her. And by the way, on this show, on this live show, we are going to be having Jesse here live later on in the show. So if you have questions for Jesse, that's going to be your opportunity to submit them. But you have these 2 women, they're working together, and then they get arrested. Each are charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse, ranging from torture to malnourishment to injuries causing emotional harm. And it was interesting the way that they were charged because first it was alleged that Ruby and Jodi, that they had filmed a video together in Jodi's house like 2 days before their arrest. So they couldn't argue or deny, we don't know what's going on. We didn't know what was happening with the kids. That doesn't work. But they could also be found guilty of these charges because the way they were charged, it was either that Ruby or Jodi inflicted the injuries or they caused or allowed the other person to do it. So in the end, they both ended up pleading guilty to 4 of the 6 aggravated child abuse charges. Each one carries up to 15 years in prison. And as part of their plea agreements, they not only agree to prison terms, but they agree that their sentences for each charge will run consecutively, not concurrently, meaning each sentence for each charge will run one after the other. Sure, didn't help that Ruby had agreed in her deal to testify against Jodi. In fact, before she took the plea deal, Ruby had issued a statement, or her law firm had issued a statement on her behalf, completely blaming Jodi for what happened. And now, as we sit here today, as we host and cover this on this live show, their sentencing is set for February 20th. So there are a lot of moving parts. There is a lot going on here. And here's what we're going to do. I want you to share your thoughts and your comments in our live chat. I'm going to be taking your questions, addressing any opinions you might have about this case from our chat. But here's the deal. To make sure that your message is noticed and it doesn't get lost in all the mix, you can send a super chat our way. We're going to ensure that it gets addressed. Super chats are really the best way to get your message noticed. And before we even get into all that, before we even get into your questions and what's happening, and there's clearly a lot to get into, I want to let you know that we have a new show coming out. I'm very excited for you to check it out. It's something I think you're really going to enjoy. Take a look. High-speed chases.
We got up.
Unruly suspects.
I will kill that motherfucker.
You chase me?
No.
Do it.
Stay in the blue box.
I like it, Kiki.
Dramatic DUIs.
I'ma pass everything that she's trying to do.
And shocking body cam footage.
Hey, get on the ground! Get on the ground!
Law and Crime presents Body Cam, the place for real, raw, and wild police videos.
You should have seen it. It was good. It's on body camera. I'll show it to you.
Catch the action and subscribe to our new YouTube channel now. All right, I'm really excited about that show and that channel because, first of all, it's by popular demand. You guys love the body cam videos. We see that. We heard you. We decided to create our own channel purely based on body cam videos. Do I have a little bit of a conflict of interest because I'm one of the narrators on it? Yes, but I say that because I actually really enjoy watching these videos. You know, there's one thing to hear police talk about what happened when they testify at a trial. There's another thing you read the police reports, but to actually see the body cam footage, I know as the show that I executive produce and host, Prime Crime, we focus heavily on that. So now for you to have an opportunity to see all of these kinds of things unfold, can't wait for you to check it out. Go subscribe. We're going to be officially launching that this Monday, February 5th. You can click the link in the description or the pinned comment to subscribe. You can catch all the action on Law and Crime Body Cam. So we'll see you there. But before we take some of your questions, and I already see them coming in, I want to just tell you, I want to run a poll right now. I want to run a poll. Tell me what you think. The question I'm going to ask you, and you could submit it online, is do you think YouTube should be stricter with family channels on their platform? Family channels like the Ruby Franke's 8 Passengers channel. I mean, it was huge on YouTube. And the question is, should they be more strict? I'm interested to hear your comments. I'm interested to hear your opinions. We're going to come back to those results later, but I'm going to take a look at some of your questions right now. Again, super chats are the best way to get them up there because that'll go to the top. We'll answer those first. Let me go to a super chat from TDB. How long will Ruby spend in prison? That is a great question because Utah law is a little bit different. Utah law is a little bit different in that traditionally, if you watch our trials and, we go to sentencing, a judge will say to the defendant, I've looked at all the evidence. I've looked at some of the aggravating factors, the mitigating factors, and we believe, I believe that the sentence should be 30 years, or I believe that I have no choice. My hands are locked. It should be life in prison. Utah is something called indeterminate sentencing. And by that, I mean what we expect on February 20th is the judge is kind of limited in what the judge can do. The judge can't sentence Ruby Franke to 30 years or Jodi Hildebrandt to 15 years or whatever it is. What the judge will say is this is the sentencing range, 1 to 15 years on each of these charges. You have agreed to prison term. You've agreed that the sentences will run consecutively, meaning one after the other. But it can't actually give a definitive sentence. What decides that in Utah is the Utah Board of Prisons and Paroles, and what they ultimately pardons and paroles, excuse me, and what they determine ultimately is how long Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt would be behind bars. So they're going to be in jail, and they will eventually come up in front of this board who will determine if they can be released or not. So we really don't know. We really don't know. There's an idea here. Well, they don't have a criminal history. They don't have what you would see in other kinds of circumstances. They agreed to plead guilty to 4 of the 6 charges. That's one of the reasons why they pled guilty, by the way. Take 2 charges off the table. You got to give them incentive to plead guilty. You got to give them incentive to not go take this to trial. So, I mean, realistically, would you see 30 years in prison? Would you see more than that? Probably not. There has been talk about whether it would be maybe 4 years, maybe 6 years. We're going to have Sky Lazaro on a little bit later on to talk about this. She's a Utah-based criminal defense attorney, and she could give us a better understanding about the prison term. But one thing I will say, I am happy maybe that's not the best word. I think it's in the best interest of everybody involved that these two pled guilty. It saves the time, the expense, the heartache of a trial, having those children testify. If you can avoid that, better for it. All right, so we're going to take more of your questions, but right now we got our guest. We got our first guest of our live show. We're joined right now by Amanda Gilbert, who's a journalist for KUTV2 News out in Utah, who has been actively following this case alongside Brian Schnee, who's been on our program multiple times. Amanda, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, you bet. I sit next to Brian Schnee usually, actually. So we've talked extensively about this case. I know he's been working on it a lot.
Yeah, you know, he's a great guy. Always happy to talk to him. Happy to talk to you. I think the best place to start is there's been a lot of things happening, like a lot of recent hearings in terms of what Kevin Frankie, what is looking for right now. We know that the sentencing is happening up. So can you give us a picture? What are the hearings? What's happening right now that we should be knowing about?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and you just answered a question about it, is February 20th is the next really big day. That's when we're going to be learning more about the sentencing, and that's when we'll be learning more about prison time, which I think is on everyone's mind. So Schnee and I are actually planning on heading back down to southern Utah for that. It's interesting just being a reporter here. People not in this state might not understand too. Ruby Franke's house is in a small town in northern Utah, but a lot of a lot of the hearings and the sentencing have actually been in southern Utah, about 4 to 5 hours away from that home, and that's also where Hildebrandt's home is located, and Ivan's also in southern Utah, where a lot of this all started.
Yeah, and I think that geography is important because when I spoke to Randy Kester, who is representing Kevin Franke, he said his client was shocked to learn that Ruby and the kids were in Ivan's. Like, what are you doing there? It's so far away. And I think it's interesting, if we can talk about Kevin for a second, because he is trying to get Jodi Hildebrandt to pay for the medical expenses of these children, their ongoing therapy. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, and to be honest, I haven't followed that as closely, but I do know the big question with him is what's going to happen, with the future of him, and what role does he play in all of this? So that is something that we honestly don't have a lot of answers to. And, he has his opinion and his side. So we kind of have to see, what's going to happen with him.
Right.
Is he going to face any type of responsibility?
Well, let's be clear. He hasn't been accused of abusing the kids or being an active participant. There were those who were questioning his judgment in terms of, he had separated from Ruby Franke for over a year. When I interviewed his attorney, I asked him and pressed him, so why was he wasn't in contact with his own children? And Randy Kester said, well, Kevin was under the belief that was the best interest of the family if he doesn't stay in contact with them. This idea that he was warped by Jodi Hildebrandt's teachings. I think people are still bothered by the fact that he wasn't in contact with the kids and knew what was going on. And of course, there are people who suggest that at the time of 8 Passengers, they were concerned about, his parenting techniques or allowing Ruby to parent. So there's been a lot of assumptions and a lot of accusations, but he hasn't been criminally charged or been implicated in this in any way. We do have a question here, Amanda, and I wanted to throw it to you because we are getting questions in from our viewers. This is from Smurfit. Love the name. Love the name. The kids are still in state custody, right? Because I understand Kevin is trying to regain custody of them.
Yes, that is true. And I actually attended one of the hearings connected to the children specifically and their future. And a lot of that has now been blocked off to the public, which is understandable because of the nature of their future. And we're talking about children here. So that is accurate. And I think that's a big part of what Kevin's fighting for, is to get his kids, and he believes he should have them. So.
Yeah, and I know that there was, we all have to remember that when the news broke about Ruby Franke being arrested, Shari Franke, who's one of the older children, she had posted on Instagram the caption, "Finally." And it was really remarkable to see the daughter, who was in all these videos of 8 Passengers, coming out against her mom. And you come to find out that her relationship with Kevin was fractured. There was even a point when he wanted the police to arrest Shari because she had entered the family home. But by all accounts, that relationship seems to have mended. And it seems that he is now, I don't know if you've heard anything different, but it seems now that he is working that relationship with Shari is on the good side.
Yes, yeah, we've noticed that too, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the question is, and Amanda, when you think about this case, what is the community reaction to it? Obviously, we're here in New York. We're taking questions from all over the country, from around the world about it. The amount of attention to this case was massive, partly because a lot of people knew who Ruby Franke was. But in your community, what is it like?
I will say, I would echo a lot of reporters feel this way out here. A lot of the neighborhoods where a lot of this has happened have actually been very quiet. A lot of neighbors do not want this in the news. They do not want to talk to us. They feel that this is a private matter involving kids. They don't want it out there. So a lot of the attention has actually been more from people outside of the state or people not as connected to it, because we can't get much. I was in the Ivans neighborhood where Hildebrandt was. It's very secluded, very rural, very the population is just an older population, people that might have two homes, one in California, one there. So they just don't want anything to do with it, if I'm being honest. So,
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is at the hearings, the recent hearings for Hildebrandt and Frankie, they've been very quiet. Not a lot of people in court or at the courthouse in general. You just have family and media there, which is so interesting because this is a case that's gotten worldwide attention. So it's interesting to be there. When you think of other trials and other cases, there's crowds of people outside. That's kind of the picture you think.
Yeah. By the way, we're taking more of your questions. Super chat's the best way to get your question up at the top. We have a super chat from Liz in Texas. Oh, no question. Just thank the viewer for the no question. They just wanted to send a super chat our way. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was so nice of you. Thank you, Liz in Texas. Okay, let me ask you this, Amanda. We know that there's kind of conflicting reports, and we don't have a lot of the full information. Well, from what your reporting indicates, I mentioned it briefly in terms of DCFS, Department of Child and Family Services, police, visiting the Franke home at prior occasions. And these kinds of red flags that were being raised by Shari Franke and people online and neighbors. What do we know about that?
We know there was a lot of that. It sounds like it had been going on for at least a year, maybe more than that. So that's why that finally from Shari Franke was so huge, because I think it showed how long she had been fighting to get some sort of, I don't know what the right word is, resolution or some sort of change. So we know there's been a lot of little things here and there about many different things related to different members of the family. So what's ironic is there was a lot going on with that Springville home, but it wasn't until the son escaped all the way in southern Utah.
Oh, Amanda, I think your feed froze out. It's a shame. But listen, Amanda, appreciate it when you see this back. Amanda Gilbert, that was from KUTV2 News, covering that case out in that area. Really appreciate it. We're going to get more to your questions. But remember, I mentioned that poll. Do you think YouTube should have stricter guidelines with family channels? Here's what we have so far. Should YouTube have stricter guidelines with family channels on their platform? The idea is maybe passengers wouldn't have flourished so much. 70% of you say yes. 12% of you say no. And 18% of you are not sure. These are very interesting results. If you could actually send us a question about why you voted a certain way, I would love to hear it, because I think the idea of the platform that was given that amplified Ruby Franke's message is there's an idea that this all broke in 2023, but was it brewing for years beforehand? Did people notice it? Let's go to more of your questions. We have Marianne. Why do you think Ruby and Jodi decided to plea? So I mentioned that before. I think a couple of reasons. One, the evidence was really bad. The evidence was really bad against them. You had 2 children who were taken to be evaluated. First of all, the forensic examination would detail a lot of this abuse. Maybe not everything, because remember, this was over a certain period of time, but it would detail a lot. You also had what was the accounts of these two young children about what happened. And remember, when Russell had escaped that home, he was found with bindings. So the evidence against both of them would have been really bad. Ruby, if you take her at her word, she suggested this is a way for her to take ownership, to take accountability, to maybe develop a relationship with her children in the future. She probably didn't want her young children, to have to testify against her. That is traumatic when any victim has to testify, let alone two young children. And as for Jodi Hildebrandt, I seem to recall her attorney said that she had been offered a deal before Ruby Franke. Not sure that's true. Can't confirm it. But remember, as part of Ruby Franke's plea deal, she was going to testify against Jodi. How was that going to look? That was going to be a slam dunk case. Ruby testifying against what Jodi did? I mean, when you have your co-defendant testifying against you, there was not much way for her to go. I covered cases before. In fact, I'm going to have Sky Lazaro on here in a little bit. We did a whole sidebar episode on possible defenses for Jodi Hildebrandt before she ended up pleading guilty. They were limited. You can't say you didn't have knowledge. You can't even deny that. You can't even say, well, I didn't inflict the injury, Ruby did. That doesn't work. You could still be found guilty. You could say that the kids weren't telling the truth. You could say the injuries were caused by something else. You might be able to assert a mental health defense of some kind, but it was really limited. So I'm not surprised. And their goal is, listen, if I can plead guilty to 4 charges, have 2 charges be taken off the table, whatever punishment I might have received if I was found guilty at trial of all 6, it won't be as bad now. Maybe the Board of Pardon and Paroles will spare me a little bit moving forward. So they're hoping for leniency. Well, Jodi is. By the way, we're going to interview Jesse Hildebrand, Jodi's niece, a little bit later on in the program. When I spoke with them, they said they didn't believe anything that Jodi's attorney had to say. This idea that Jodi was just really concerned about the kids and was concerned about their well-being. Jesse Hildebrand does not believe that. I will ask them about that a little bit later. But okay, so Marianne, thank you so much for the question. We're going to take more of your questions. This is from Janine. If found guilty, will she serve consecutive sentences or skate with concurrent? While we remember in their plea agreements, in both Ruby and Jodi's plea agreements, what they agreed to, what they signed, was not only agreeing to a prison term, but consecutive sentences, one after the other. Now, could the judge not accept that? It's possible. Could the judge say, listen, I know they agreed to consecutive one after the other, but I think in the interest of this case, concurrent would be better. I think it's going to be consecutive sentences. So, even if it's 1 year in prison for these second-degree felonies, that's minimum of 4 years. 1 year for each of the 4. 4 years. But you have to be thinking about it could be more. And remember, it's not up to the judge. It's up to the Board of Pardon and Paroles to determine how long both will be going away. By the way, talking about this case, we actually have a prime crime that is going to be coming out about this the week of the sentencing. So we're going to talk about this story from beginning to end. We have a lot of the key players, a lot of key sound that we're going to throw to, and I hope everybody can check it out because we tell that story from beginning to end, give you a whole 360-degree picture. So prime crime will come out the week this actually airs, the week of sentencing. We get another question from Chopper. Will Ruby be put into the general population in prison, or will she be held in protective custody? Good question. Look, at this point, we just don't know. But what I can tell you is when you have a very high-profile defendant, you have to take that into consideration. She will have a target in her back, not only because of her celebrity nature, but also because of the abuse of children. And when you're dealing with people who are convicted of harming kids, you don't just see it in the movies. You see it in real life. They're targets. In prison, sometimes the people that you target, that's a problem. I mean, that builds up your prison cred. There's a number of reasons, and it's dangerous for people who are in these high-profile situations and cases. So, again, I just think that it's not sympathy. It's just that has to be for her well-being and safety. That has to be taken into consideration. So please send more of your super chats. It's the best way to get your questions to the top. Again, I'm going to have in a little bit Sky Lazaro. She's going to be talking to a criminal defense attorney out in Utah. We're going to talk about some of the intricacies of the case. If you have a question for me or Sky, definitely send it in. And remember, a little bit later on the program, we are going to have Jesse Hildebrand on here as well. So if you have questions for Jesse, make sure to submit them. All right. We got Sky Lazaro, Utah criminal defense attorney, who's joining us. Sky, good to see you. I mean, I was just talking about the fact we were thinking about possible defenses for Jodi Hildebrandt before she ended up pleading guilty. You said it then. You didn't really think it was going to be very successful.
Right before. I think it was right after I was on last time that she entered plea.
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, it's not, you weren't surprised by that.
No.
Very limited
I was
defenses.
a little surprised, I think, that they were offered the same plea, I guess, when one of the pleas was, we'll give you this if you agree to testify. Not that it was a great offer. It was, agree to go to prison. But
by the way, can I just ask you, I won't throw out names here, but the attorney who is representing Jodi Hildebrandt, his name escapes me. I apologize at this point. He said, and I remember this pretty clearly, that in his press conference, Jodi was offered the deal before Ruby. I'm skeptical of that, considering that Ruby was going to testify against Jodi. How do you think that worked?
I don't know. Unless they were both offered the same, if you agree to testify, whoever gets there first. But then why make the same offer to, why let them plead to both? Both do the same thing. That was it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little.
It didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense to me either. That's why I asked you. You're a better mind than me.
Yeah.
Let's talk the sentencing. I mentioned it a little bit, that it's not the judge who determines the ultimate sentence. It is the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Walk us through, if you can, how this indeterminate sentencing works and how long you think actually Jodi and Ruby are going to go to prison for.
So our Board of Pardons and Parole, what'll happen at sentencing is they'll get committed to the Utah State Prison for an indeterminate term. I think the counts were run consecutive, if I remember right.
Yes. Yep.
So what'll happen is the board will get everything from the district court, and then the sentencing guidelines are what govern what the matrix looks like as far as when would they be eligible for parole. So when you have consecutive sentences, you do 40%, you do whatever the matrix is on the first sentence or the lead crime. In this case, they're all second-degree felonies, so it doesn't matter. And then you do 40% of the matrix on the subsequent.
So what does that mean so when you're saying that, let's say for example it was just 1 year, right? Let me rephrase that. Let's say it was one charge, 1 to 15 years, one count of aggravated child abuse. What are you saying? Considering no criminal record, what do you think?
So and I don't even remember what it is offhand. The sentencing guidelines, this would be a second-degree person, so she's probably looking at closer to 5 or 6, but
years, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, she's gonna do some time on this. There's no question about that.
So I've spoken to another Utah lawyer who actually thought that this was not going to be anywhere near 30 years or anything more than that. Since it effectively I think this is the way he described it to me. You can't combine the sentences where it would effectively be a life sentence. You couldn't do that.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
true? Okay. So
That's
it's not
true.
like 60 years in prison. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But he was saying, if I remember correctly, it could be 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that we might be looking. But technically, let's say they're horrible inmates. They don't repent for what they do. Couldn't they just be denied parole every time they're up?
They could. I don't think that'll happen in Utah. I think they'll probably, on the first count, they'd probably be eligible. This is in a mandatory prison.
Well, let me ask
crime.
you this.
And so they probably would do a couple years if it was only one.
Okay.
So,
Well, let me ask you this. When we look to the sentencing, we have a great question from Nikki Hayes. And the question is, will Ruby's children choose to and or be allowed to make victim impact statements at sentencing?
they will be allowed to. Every victim of a crime has the right to be heard in Utah under our Victims Crime Act, to be heard at different parts of it, but sentencing for certain. So they don't have to. They can. If they choose to, they can do it via letter. They can have someone else speak. They could designate someone to speak on their behalf because they're minors, if they don't want to testify themselves, but they will have the opportunity to be heard.
We have another question from Kate Knows 712. Kate, what do you know? That's the question I have for you, but that's for another time. There's another time. Okay. Are they likely to carry out their sentences in the same prison? That's interesting.
Potentially,
Yeah.
yes. Utah has a system. We've got two separate prisons. We've got the prison that's up here in Salt Lake. We have another one in Gunnison, and then they have contracts with counties where it's called counting someone out too. So people can do their time in different county prisons or county jails. So it's hard to say where they'll both end up. They'll probably both go, I would say, to Draper to start with, and then they may get transitioned out. And different jails have different programs. So if they want to do some specific programming while they're there or treatment to try to, get good time, then they
Let's
could go
talk about
to
that. Draper that you mentioned, what is that facility like? And I'll actually couple that with a question that we got earlier from Chopper, whose question was, would Ruby be put in the general population or will she be put in sort of a solitary confinement or protective custody?
No, I mean, they'll go into general population, and I call it Draper because it used to be in Draper. The prison's now moved out by the airport. They built a new prison about a year ago. But this isn't federal prison where there's low risk, sort of where everybody, Jen Shaw went and people like white collar crime people go. State prison is state prison. And so it's not a good place. It's not somewhere you want to be.
That is very true. I thought a consideration would be how high profile this case is. And also anytime you have a defendant who was convicted or pled guilty to crimes related to children, that puts a target on your back. They don't put that into consideration?
They do. Generally speaking, what they try to do is anyone, especially people convicted of child-related or sex-related offenses, a lot of those people end up doing their time in Gunnison or in counties. They do try to keep those people separate from your violent criminal, gang member type criminal people.
Yeah.
So.
Going back to the sentencing, though, I mean, look, I'm fascinated by it. Even though we're not going to know what their sentence is definitively, we don't know how long they're going to go away for. I am curious to see who's going to be speaking there. I am curious to see if Ruby and Jodi will make a statement. Do you think there's anything they can say or any person that would speak on their behalf that would help their sentence in any way? And again, would help their chances for parole later on?
Well, here's what's interesting, and I think what even a lot of defense lawyers in Utah don't know is what's said at sentencing is not given to the board. So there's certain things that are given to the Board of Pardons and Parole. One of them's the packet that AP&P completes, the pre-sentence investigation. But really what they would need to do is have someone approach the board on their behalf with those written statements or video recorded statements and all those mitigating terms that they want considered as it relates to the amount of time they're going to do, because what's said at sentencing is very rarely communicated or transferred to the board. I don't even think that they request the audio from it.
Yeah. I that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting to know
that. So those are things that, they would want to do at an original hearing date when the board's considering paroling them. They'd want people to come speak there. That would be more helpful than anything said at sentencing.
Sky, we got a super chat. A couple super chats I want to talk about. So first of all, super chat from Miss Tuesday 11. No question, just wanted to support us. Thank you so much, Miss Tuesday
Thank
11. Really appreciate that. We have a super chat from Megan Walters 2008. This is a great question. Why was the malnourishment charge dropped? Let me give everybody a little bit of perspective on this to add it. So both Ruby and Jodi, they were each charged with 6 aggravated child abuse counts. And 2 of those charges were dropped. And the charges that were dropped were related, and by the way, these were child abuse charges that ranged from torture to emotional harm to the infliction of multiple injuries at a time. Well, the charge that was dropped related to the malnourishment. Now, I'm curious, Sky, why that was dropped, because clearly Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt are both agreeing in their plea agreement that they malnourished these kids, that they denied them food and water. Is it that it's duplicative of the other charges, and that wasn't necessary? Because if they're going to agree in a plea deal and have certain charges dropped, why do you drop that charge and not the other ones?
I don't know. I don't know if that was a conversation that was it relates to the plea, or if the offer was simply plead to the first 2 as it relates to each child, and we'll dismiss the third. I guess you don't know unless you've had we're in on the conversations with the prosecutor, but where the plea, the statement of facts in the plea form encompasses all, essentially all the allegations that were made against both of them. I don't know that it makes much difference. My guess is the offer was, plead to 2 counts for each kid.
Yeah, and it's not like they're saying
the first 2. I don't. It could have been that simple.
And it's not like they're saying, "Oh, they couldn't prove that charge. Look, they couldn't prove that one." You're admitting to that's what happened. It would have been very easy to prove, in my opinion. I think it would have been easy to prove.
I agree. I really think it was just a matter of getting the case resolved.
Yeah. By the way, Miss Tuesday 11, another super chat donation to us. Thank you so much. That was so kind of you. Really, really appreciate that. We have a question from Chi. Were there 6 charges because there were 6 kids? No. This was only in relation to the abuse of 2 children. As we talked about, there were 6 charges. And I'm going to ask Sky about this too. But the reason there were 6 charges is each one similar and different. So each one has the same beginning language. It talks about the infliction of injuries. But what those injuries constitute or what those injuries cause is different. So you could have one charge of aggravated child abuse that it constitutes torture, physical injuries that constitute torture. Another charge was physical injuries that result in emotional harm. Another one is physical injuries that result in malnourishment. So each one is very specific. I was always curious, Sky, did you think that the amount of charges here would have been, was it overcharged in any way? Was it an aggressive charging decision? I don't think so. I think if you listen to the facts of the case, you listen to what they were accused of doing, it fits within each one of those. But was it necessary to charge each of them with 6 counts?
I think it was charged probably fairly appropriately, honestly. I mean, I think they picked three counts that were representative of the type of behavior that was being exhibited against these children. And could they have charged every single incident that the kids told them about? Yes. Do they do that normally? No. So I would say this is pretty standard in Utah, where they would choose a couple counts that are representative of what was going on and go with that.
We have another super chat. This one is from Nina Stanek. Why do you think Kevin Frankie hasn't been charged? So I'm going to answer that one first, and Sky, I'll throw it to you. Okay. This is my take. There is no evidence to suggest at this point that he had any role or participation in what happened to Russell and Eve, the 2 kids that constitute these charges. There is no evidence to suggest he's ever even been at that house in that period of time, because what we've heard is that he was living separately from Ruby and the kids for over a year. Now, that doesn't negate the questions that people might have about how could a father be away from his children for so long. But remember, when we spoke to his attorney, he said that he was just following the instructions of Ruby and Jodi, that they thought the problems in their marriage, their differences they had in the way they wanted to bring up the children. It was best that he stay away. But that's not a crime. That's not a crime. It's not a crime. So we have to be very clear that although people might have concerns about him, questions about him, he has not been implicated criminally in anything that has happened here. And I just want to stress that enough. But I will throw it back to you, Sky, because a lot of people have questions about Kevin Frankie, and a lot of people criticized Kevin Frankie back in the day.
I agree. I mean, I can understand the questions about how does he not know or how does he not be involved. But, the child abuse statute, says someone who has care or custody of a child and either causes or allows another to inflict that serious physical injury. One, doesn't sound like the kids were in his custody. He was living
Right.
elsewhere, and they would have to show that he knew about it and at the very least, ignored it, even if he didn't, support it. So he would be hard to charge, unless he lied about something and they could jam him up on an obstruction charge or something along those lines. I think folding him under the statute where he was living somewhere else would be pretty difficult.
And let me follow that up with his ability to get the kids back. How tough is that? How tough is it to regain custody of the kids from state custody?
And I don't know the posture of whether or not there was a parenting plan in place. But if there was, he'd have to approach the court,
Yeah.
So now he'll be able to, my guess is he'll work through with DCFS, and they'll go through like a plans to like reintroduce them and get everybody comfortable and deal with these kids as, what they need for therapy. So I don't think it's going to be difficult unless he has some other problems that they think cause him to be an unfit parent.
And remember, he filed a document recently, filed a court filing trying to get Jodi Hildebrandt to pay restitution, to pay for the costs of all the help these kids are going to need. And clearly,
the court ordered it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think that's justified considering what Jodi Hildebrandt pled guilty to and what she said she did to the kids. Sky Lazaro, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, as always. Great to see you.
Of course. All right, so keep those chats coming in. Super chats. Again, the best way to get your questions at the top so we can answer them. We have a question from Eric. When is their next court date? February 20th. That is when the sentencing is going to be, unless there's another hearing happening beforehand. But February 20th is my understanding about the next court date. All right. I mentioned getting your questions in because our next guest is somebody who I've had the honor, the privilege to speak to during the course of this whole case. Someone who can really give everyone an understanding of what we're talking about right here. So when I talk about if you have questions, if you have a super chat question, this is the time to submit it. Because right now I want to bring on Jesse Hildebrand, Jodi Hildebrandt's niece. Jesse, great to see you. Always enjoy talking to you. And it's, as I said, such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So again, we're going to get some people probably have a lot of questions. Here's my question to you. We are coming to, in a way, a conclusion, at least the legal conclusion of this case. How are you feeling, considering that in a couple of weeks, Jodi Hildebrandt, while we don't know her official sentence, by all accounts, she's going to prison. And we don't, for potentially a long time.
Yeah, it's been, there's so many layers. There's so many, I feel like, phases of emotions that I've experienced through this whole thing. There's been some really challenging moments of putting aside my own, things that have been challenged my own beliefs in, around the justice system, around restorative justice, around punishment versus accountability. There's the hurt child in me that's so, feels so validated and vindicated by this. And then there's the adult me that truly believes in stepping away from the idea of punishment for the sake of punishment and stepping towards people being held accountable. And Jodi has proven time and time again for over 15 years that she is not safe She's not safe to be around people. She's not safe to have access to vulnerable people. And she has proven that she will take advantage every single time. And so for that, I'm just grateful that she will no longer have access. She'll no longer have access to anyone.
There was something that you mentioned to me that has stayed with me since we last spoke. And it was about after Jodi Hildebrandt pled guilty, you were
Yeah.
particularly disturbed by what her lawyer said outside of court.
Yeah.
This justification or this rationale for why Jodi had pled guilty. If you can, for people
Yeah.
who didn't hear what you had to say, please let them know.
I mean, when I first heard what he had to say, it just brought up so much anger. And I realize and recognize that lawyers, he's doing his job. His job is now to just, Jodi is his client, and he's going to do the best he can for her, regardless of what I think she deserves or not. But no, it's all manipulation. It's pure. It's pure.
And to be clear, what he basically said is that Jodi's pleading guilty because it's in the best interest of the kids.
Yeah, no, she completely. He said that she wants to focus on taking accountability, and she just wants the kids to focus on healing. And it was just disgusting. It was such a slap in the face to those kids, to anyone that has suffered at her hands. She doesn't care about those children. That's why she's in prison, or will be going to prison, for torture, for not just slight, for the level in which she was abusing these children is so high. And for her to just do oh no, I did this 180 overnight, and now suddenly I care. Why didn't anyone tell me that this was bad? Suddenly I have a moral compass. It's just it's horrifying. And now this is but this is her game now, because she has access to probation. She will be spending every ounce of her efforts towards that goal. And so if that means playing this long game of manipulation, that's what it's going to be. That she has changed, and that she cares, and that she has seen the light, and she didn't know. And it's just so disgusting.
Jesse, we got some questions coming in for you. We have one, and again, if you have questions, super chat is probably the best way to do it, because your question will get to the top in the mix. But we have a question from Nikki Hayes. Are you going to be there for Jodi's sentencing, and will you be allowed to give a victim impact statement?
So unfortunately, I will not be there. I already had I'm in London right now. I already had a trip planned before all of the dates came out of when the sentencing was going to be. I am giving a victim impact statement. It's just going to be written, and I will be, depending on the date that it gets released for the first probation hearing. My plan is to be at every single one of those.
Yeah. And by the way, Nikki Hayes, who submitted the question, she said, I hope so, meaning I hope you're there or give a victim impact statement. So that's great. Nikki, appreciate the question. We got another one from Nina Stanek. Are you in contact with Ruby's children?
I'm currently not. I have had a couple. Well, I've had one email exchange with Ruby's husband, which was very interesting. I'm still uncertain how I feel or what I want to do with that. But I am absolutely open if they feel that talking to me, communicating with me would be helpful. I am absolutely open to that. I want to be able to help in any way I can.
Yeah, when we spoke, I think particularly the two younger children who are now going through all of this, trauma, who are having to go through this therapy of trying to understand what happened to them. Hearing from somebody who went through something similar, I think, would be very, very helpful. You mentioned you got a message from Kevin. Any way you can share details about what that was about?
I don't. It wasn't. There wasn't a lot of details to share. It was more just a contact of or a point of contact. When I heard that he petitioned to have her to have Jodi, you were saying right when I logged in, you were talking about it.
To pay for the expenses, the medical expenses of the kids.
Yeah, so he had reached out to like a contact that I knew and just forwarded his to ask to just like pass along his information. And when I heard that he had done that, that gave me at least some hope that there's more to the story than that's being like released or being talked about, and that he is at least trying to do what's right for his children now in this moment. And that, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to reach out to him or even like what that would do, or I was uncertain how I felt about it. And I was very honest with him about how I didn't have a lot of sympathy for him. It was hard for me to like have an unbiased approach because of my own pain and my own pain towards my own parents, and like having been on the receiving end of Jodi's abuse and having my parents not having stepped in. It's hard for me to hold space for that, at least at this point. Now, from what I have gathered and from how I understand it, I think that he is doing everything in his power currently to do what he can for his children now. And yeah. I mean, that's all. Unfortunately, that's all he can do. That's all anyone can do. Like after the fact, like we can't change the past.
No, that's 100% true, which actually is interesting that I have you, because what can you do about the future? In the sense that I posed the question to everybody on here, should YouTube have be stricter with family channels on their platform? And I guess it's a larger question about, should certain companies, social media companies, should they be more careful about what is amplified on the platform? Clearly there's people that will criticize and comment anything. But with Ruby Franke and with Jodi Hildebrandt, it was a little bit different. And I'm curious what your position is moving forward. Is there a way that this could have been prevented? Is there a way that this message maybe could have not been amplified so large? I'm just curious your perspective on it.
Yeah, sure. I think that's such a complicated question. Yes, and like who gets to decide what is going on YouTube, and like what would disqualify it or qualify it as something that is harmful. It's I think it would be a pretty difficult thing to what's the word, to manage.
Right.
But I mean, I think there was pretty obvious signs that something was not exactly correct, and that there were some people have been concerned about that family from how I understand it, for a long time. Yep. I haven't watched the YouTube channel. I've seen snippets here and there since like all of this has started, and it is pretty concerning. At least the parts that I've seen out of context of like the rest of the channel. I wish that it's so tough, because some people support it, or like some people watch it because of it, just like they're so shocked by it, but that watching then goes to like, it still translates as support on their end. Yeah. So I'm certain that a lot of people that were watching her channel were not in support of what they were doing, but that still translated into views, and then that therefore into money.
And in terms of Jodi Hildebrandt, when you think about all the missed opportunities for people to step in, and by the way, I should let you know, Jesse, one of the great things about doing this show live, so many of the people in our chat are saying you are brave, and they are all sending you their love. So I just hope you know that. But just to wrap it up in terms of how the lessons learned, especially from what you went through and talked about, that this could have been prevented, and more people should be more aware of warning signs.
I'm sorry, it's a little bit noisy where I'm at. So
I know, they're so noisy in London, which, by the way, I think it's about almost 10 o'clock at night?
Almost 9, I think.
9. All right. Yeah. About that. So
Yeah.
no, I was just going to say, like, so everybody is sending their love on the chat. And I think just if you could, before we close it out, if you could talk about, with you specifically, we mentioned, there's a way to guard content online from family channels, but with you, there was so many warning signs and people were saying things and not more was done. What do you think the lesson is there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of lessons to be taken away from this. Learning to trust our guts. I think that is a huge one. I think a lot of people saw and a lot of people were concerned. But there's this, we talk ourselves out of it. Oh, it's not a concern. It's not my business. These aren't my kids. Or like, oh, the church, especially within the context of the church, the authorities of the church should be able to step in. This isn't my place. There's so many. I think there's so much of that going on. Or like in a similar way that when there's an emergency and no one calls 911 because everyone's assuming the other person's calling 911. So it's a matter of trusting your gut.
Yeah.
That to me is one of the biggest ones, because of the amount of people that have reached out to me about when I was living with her, that they knew something was wrong but they didn't do anything, or they thought something was amiss but they like talked themselves out of it, or they it was easier to turn the other, like, to put on the blinders. And it's hard to step out and to speak out, especially like if there is an off chance that you're wrong. That is a scary thing. So I think learning how to develop self-trust, to listen to your gut, to understand what your values and your morals are, to not be so I don't want to say trusting, but to not give all of your power over to authority, in that sense of like, you are also the authority of your own life. But again, I know I've spoken to this quite often on, like, with you specifically. There's a lot of things within the culture of the Mormon Church that have, unfortunately, were taken advantage of, that I think as a collective, they can start bolstering those weak points.
Yeah, I think
those weak points are specifically that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. By the way, we got another question, and I'll talk about the legal aspect of it. I'm curious what you think, but we got a super chat from Stephanie McGettin. When they get out of prison, will they be forbidden to contact each other or their families? Well, look, I will tell you, there are times when you would have to comply with a no contact order set forward by the court. That's common. This happens a lot. Sometimes, usually you see it while the case is ongoing. Or they could also petition the court afterwards to make sure there's no contact. The question I had for you, Jesse, and you mentioned it a little bit, the struggle that you have between, restorative justice versus, making sure people are held accountable. If Jodi Hildebrandt were to get out of prison and she reached out to you to try to ask for forgiveness, would you ever be open to having that conversation?
So, not with her. And it's not a matter of whether forgiveness is something I could ever have for her or not, but I have absolutely zero trust in her, and I cannot see there to be any possible way to rebuild that trust. She is, in my eyes, beyond, not in my eyes, but like within my life, she is beyond trust.
Yeah.
And so I think that forgiveness, that to have that conversation, there has to be at least some foundation and basis of trust. Now that, for me, like in my own healing, because I think forgiveness is something that a lot of people have different definitions for. And like, I think a lot of people view forgiveness as a releasing of accountability. Like, I release you from the burden of what you've done. And I don't think I will ever do that for her. Now, letting go of the pain and the anger that I have towards her for myself, that is something else entirely, and something that I feel like I'm pretty far along into for my own journey. But no, I would never have that conversation with her.
Yeah, completely understandable because, you know, one of the things that you had talked to me about was that idea of every time you tried to speak to somebody and tried to explain what was going on, she would manipulate the situation, force you to say what she wanted you to say, or she would lie to them about, or allegedly lie to them about what happened.
Oh yeah.
And that was something that, like, you know, really, really was disturbing. We have one more super chat I want to get to. This is a super chat from Kayla Sloan. Yes, I think that there should be wellness checks from the state, love the family or not, similar to a home study for adopting children. Look, there was apparently a wellness check in the Frankie case, but nothing came of it. You know, there was one wellness check, I believe, when they thought the kids were home alone, but no one answered the door. It didn't seem police felt that there was enough more that they could do. It's interesting talking about that with you, Jesse, because the idea if it's somebody had checked on the home while you were living with Jodi, what could have been?
Well, that's the thing that's so unfortunate about these like things like wellness checks is that when you're dealing with a narcissist, like a grandiose narcissist, a malignant narcissist, a psychopath, they can manipulate the situation. And Jodi, like, you know, she fits. She's a successful, charming, wealthy person, like white woman. That is incredibly intelligent, can talk to you in circles. She doesn't fit the criteria that I think is kind of ingrained into this, like, into the system of like what constitutes a wellness check.
Right.
And I think I think that understanding of what a wellness check needs to be, or what the signs to look for, needs to be upgraded and changed, because there's so much abuse and neglect that goes under the radar because of that. Like, you know, like, oh, we show up at this really nice house and no one answered the door. They're probably fine. You know, there's a loving husband, like this white family that's a loving husband and wife, and they fit this really like this narrative that America, you know,
Yeah.
it just I see. I agree that like if families are, if there's like these social media families that are putting their children on the internet, I think that should be something that is kind of ingrained into that. Like, okay, wellness checks up, like maybe like a mandatory psychology, I don't know, something like that, where there's a unbiased third party that is keeping like a checks and balances almost with it. But that requires the children to feel safe enough if there is an issue to speak out. Because even when I went to the police, I was still terrified that if I said too much, that I would, because like what Jodi had like convinced me of is that I just destroy everyone's life and that I just lie and destroy people's reputations. So when I did go to the police, I was so careful about what I said. And because I didn't want her to, you know, I was like, oh, I don't want to destroy this person's life because that's what I just do. So I was like, oh, I just told the cops like the bare minimum about what I thought would get me out of the home without her being arrested.
Right. And I remember. I encourage, by the way, everybody to check out our prior conversations on Sidebar, where you went into more detail about everything. But listen, Jesse, I hope you enjoy London. I can't tell you how much I appreciate having these conversations with you, coming on. And again, we're getting a lot of love on our chat for you. So stay strong. We look forward to speaking to you again soon. And safe trip back home.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. So this was fantastic. I can't tell you how much I thank you for coming on today, submitting your questions, talking about the Ruby Franke case. I could probably talk about it for another hour. And look, I know I'm waiting to see what happens at sentencing. We won't get the full answer about how long they're going to go to prison for, but we will get a certain understanding. We will get an understanding about who's going to speak at that sentencing. We will also know that if whether or not the sentences will run consecutively or concurrently. Again, I believe they're going to be consecutively, but we will continue to follow it. And listen, in terms of what we did here, we want to go live more on YouTube. We want to do it more often. We want to talk about some of the most trending cases in true crime regularly. Who knows, maybe even weekly if we can do it. We value your voices more than anything. We want to hear from you. So next time, maybe we'll even have you, the viewer, call in, share your opinion on the live stream. We might be able to figure out a way to do it. And if you want to come on stream and discuss anything with me, maybe we'll do that. But always submit your questions on the chat. Always submit super chats. Best way to get those questions up there. By the way, if there are any cases that you want to talk about, let us know. Let us know what you're interested in talking about. There's a lot going on right now. Maybe we'll do another one of these and talk about that. You can submit your questions. Now, before I close out, I do want to mention once again, Law&Crime's new body cam channel, our whole new YouTube channel dedicated only to police body cam videos. It is aptly named Law&Crime Body Cam. It's going to be your new destination for all of the most shocking police interactions on the internet, high-speed chases, dramatic DUIs, arrests that, I mean, I'm telling you, I narrate some of these. Things you're just going to have to wait and see. It's pretty hard to believe. But I want you to check out the channel. Go subscribe. We're officially launching this Monday, February 5th. You can click the link in the description or in the pinned comment to subscribe and catch all of the action on Law&Crime Body Cam. I'm Jesse Weber. Thanks so much, everybody. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. High-speed chases.
We got up to
Unruly suspects.
I will kill that mother.
You gonna tase me?
No.
Do it.
Stay in the blue box.
I like it, Kiki.
Dramatic DUIs.
I'ma pass everything that she's trying to do.
And shocking body cam footage.
Hey, get on the ground! Get on the ground!
Law&Crime presents Body Cam, the place for real, raw, and wild police videos.
You should have seen it. It was good. It's on body camera. I'll show it to you.
Catch the action and subscribe to our new YouTube channel now.